Ambassador Chen Wei had spent 40 years of his life sitting in a chair that nobody respected. And on this particular morning, he finally understood that nothing would ever change. The Grand Assembly Hall of Volantis Prime stretched before him like a cathedral built by gods, with crystal spires reaching toward an artificial sky and floating platforms, carrying representatives from 900 different species, each one older and more powerful than humanity had ever been. Chun sat in the back row where humanity had always sat, where the youngest species were placed like children at the adults' table, expected to watch and learn and never speak too loudly. The Malurian High Chancellor was droning on about hyperspace trade routes, his forearms gesturing dramatically, while translators converted his clicking speech into something humans could understand. And Chun found himself wondering if anyone in this vast chamber even remembered that humans existed 300 years ago. Humanity had discovered faster than light travel and stumbled into a galaxy already filled with ancient civilizations. And the galactic concord had welcomed them the way a mansion owner might welcome a stray cat, with polite smiles and a clear understanding that the newcomer should stay out of the way. Chun remembered his grandfather telling stories about those early days, about the hope humanity had felt when they realized they were not alone, about the dreams of learning from species that had mastered technologies humans could barely imagine. Those dreams had died slowly over 3 centuries of polite dismissal. Every request humanity made was tabled for future discussion, and future discussion never came, because there was always something more important. Always some ancient dispute between real powers that demanded attention while the humans waited patiently in their back row seat. The Kreth hegemony had been expanding for decades now, swallowing smaller species and absorbing their worlds into an empire built on conquest. And when Kreth warships appeared in human colonial space, the Concord had promised diplomatic intervention. That was 2 years ago, and the diplomatic intervention had never materialized because the Kreth were too powerful to challenge, and humanity was too weak to matter. Chun had watched 3 human colonies fall silent, their distress signals fading into nothing while the Concord debated proper procedures and jurisdictional concerns. And he had done nothing because there was nothing he could do. His tablet buzzed with a message from Earth Command, and he read it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. The message was simple, and it changed. Everything, pack your belongings and prepare for immediate departure. The Council has made its decision. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Concord effective immediately. No formal announcement, no explanation. Just leave. Chun felt something shift inside his chest. Something that might have been relief or might have been grief. And he realized that Earth had finally accepted what he had known for decades. They were done pretending that this system would ever work for them. He stood quietly while the High Chancellor continued speaking about trade routes, and nobody noticed as he walked toward the exit, because nobody ever noticed the human ambassador unless they needed someone to vote with them on minor resolutions. His staff was already packing when he reached the human embassy, moving with silent efficiency as they boxed up 3 centuries of diplomatic records and personal effects. And Chum helped them without speaking because there was nothing left to say. They departed that night on a transport ship that had been waiting in orbit. And as Volantis Prime shrank in the rear view screen, Chun allowed himself one moment of looking back at the glittering world that had never wanted them. The Concord would barely notice their absence. For the first few months, the elder races did notice, or at least they pretended to notice, sending polite inquiries about humanity's sudden departure and expressing hope that whatever domestic issues had called them home would be resolved quickly. When those inquiries went unanswered, the tone shifted to concern, and then to curiosity, and finally to investigation. Probe ships were dispatched a solar system to determine what had happened to the youngest species. And those probes never returned, vanishing into silence the moment they crossed into human space. The Malurian oligarchy sent a diplomatic vessel crewed by their finest negotiators. And that ship also disappeared without trace or explanation. Something was happening in human space, but nobody could determine what. And eventually, the Concorde stopped trying to find out because they had more important matters to address. Because the Kreth hegemony was still expanding and ancient treaties still needed enforcing. The human seat in the Grand Assembly gathered dust for a decade, and then for a century, and then for 2 centuries. And the elder races developed theories about what had happened to the youngest species. Some believed humanity had destroyed themselves in civil war, as young species sometimes did when the pressures of galactic civilization proved too much for their primitive social structures. Others suggested that a plague had swept through their worlds, or that their star had become unstable, or that they had simply given up on existence and chosen collective extinction. The most popular theory was that humanity had retreated into isolation and stagnation, rejecting the galaxy that had rejected them and slowly declining into irrelevance whatever had happened. The elder races agreed. Humanity was no longer a factor in galactic affairs. They redistributed human, colonial territories without debate because there was no one left to object. And the Kreth hegemony claimed most of those worlds as spoils of their earlier conquest. Ambassador Chen Wei died in his sleep on Earth at the age of 112, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. And his last words were a question that none of them could answer. Will they remember us? He asked, will anyone remember that we tried his granddaughter? Maya held his hand as he passed, and she made a silent promise that she would make sure someone remembered. She was 23 years old, and she had never seen the stars beyond. Sol System had never met an alien species, had never known anything but the isolation that had defined human existence since before she was born. But she had heard stories about the galactic Concorde and the empty chair where her family had once sat. And she had heard other stories too. Stories that were not supposed to be told outside of certain rooms. Stories about what humanity was really doing. Behind that wall of silence, stories about ships being built in numbers that defied. Imagination stories about technologies being developed that would make the elder races weep with terror. Maya Chang looked up at the night sky, filled with stars that humanity had once dreamed of claiming. And she smiled because she knew something that Ambassador Chen Wei had never lived to see. The silence was almost over, and when humanity finally spoke again, the entire galaxy would listen whether they wanted to or not. Director Yuki Tanaka stood at the observation window of Lunar Command and watched the construction yards of Mars paint the darkness with fire and metal. And she felt the weight of 2 centuries pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. The shipyards never stopped. Had never stopped since the day humanity withdrew from galactic affairs, running every hour of every day as automated systems and human workers together forged weapons that would reshape the universe. She was the 17th director to hold this position, and she hoped desperately that she would be the last, that under her leadership the project her ancestors had started would finally reach completion. Below her, the latest production reports scrolled across holographic displays, showing numbers that would have seemed impossible to the humans who had fled. Volantis Prime 200 years ago, 997 warships currently operational, 3 more in final assembly construction. Of Ship 1000 would begin. Within a week, Tanaka allowed herself a small smile because she remembered her grandmother telling her about the early days of the project, about the desperate scramble to develop technologies that could hide an entire civilization from a galaxy full of enemies. Those first years had been the hardest, when humanity had nothing but determination and stolen probe technology and the burning need to survive in a universe that wanted them gone. They had torn apart the alien probes that came to investigate their silence, had studied every component and circuit and power system until they understood how the elder races built their machines. And then they had asked themselves a simple question: how do we build something better? The answer had taken decades to develop, but when it finally emerged, it changed everything. Human. Scientists discovered that the elder races had stopped innovating thousands of years ago, had settled into comfortable stagnation because they faced no real competition, because their technologies were good enough, and there was no pressure to improve. Humanity had no such luxury. They pushed boundaries that the elder races had long since abandoned, combining alien principles with human creativity in ways that produced weapons and shields and engines that defied conventional physics. The cloaking technology came first, a system that could hide entire planets from detection by bending light and gravity and sensor waves around them like water flowing past a stone cell. System vanished from galactic awareness within a decade of their withdrawal, becoming a ghost in the darkness that no probe could find and no scanner could penetrate. Then came the weapons. Tanaka walked through the corridors of Lunar Command toward the strategic planning center where Admiral Marcus Stone was waiting for her, and she passed dozens of displays showing the fruits of human determination: quantum lock targeting, arrays that could predict enemy movements before they happen, kinetic accelerators that fire projectiles at speeds the elder races considered theoretically impossible, cascade torpedoes that could turn any reactor core into a bomb by introducing carefully designed instabilities into the containment fields in the ships themselves. Each one a masterpiece of engineering that combined the best ideas of 900 alien civilizations with innovations that humans alone had developed. The elder races had built their warships to intimidate, covering them with decorative spires and glowing panels that announced their presence across star systems. Human ships were different. They were sleek and dark and designed for one purpose only: to destroy anything that threatened humanity, and to do it with absolute efficiency. Admiral Stone stood at the central planning table when Tanaka entered, a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many reports about alien atrocities, and he nodded as she approached Ship 998, just completed trials. He said, "All systems nominal and ready for fleet integration." Tanaka felt something ease in her chest because every ship that joined the fleet brought them closer to the moment they had been preparing for since before she was born. "How long until we reach 1,000? She asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4. The final components for Ship 1,000 are already in transit from the Titan factory." Stone pulled up a holographic display of the galaxy, showing the territories controlled by various powers and the expanding red stain of the Kreth hegemony that had swallowed so much of known space. "They took another world last month," he said quietly. "The Selvani homeworld." The Concord issued a statement expressing deep concern and then did nothing while an entire species was enslaved. Tanaka had read the intelligence reports, had seen the intercepted communications showing Selvani refugees being processed into labor camps, and she had felt the same cold rage that every human felt when they witnessed what the galaxy allowed to happen. "We could have stopped it," she said. "We have the ships." "Not yet," Stone replied. "If we reveal ourselves too soon, we lose the element of surprise. And surprise is the only advantage that guarantees victory." He was right, and she knew it, but that knowledge did not make the waiting any easier. 200 years of preparation, she said. 200 years of watching and building and planning. While the galaxy continued its cruelty. Stone turned to face her, and his eyes held something that might have been compassion or might have been shared pain. "My grandfather served under Ambassador Chun," he said. "He used to tell me stories about sitting in that back row seat and watching the elder races laugh at humanity behind polite smiles. He died believing that his sacrifice had been meaningless. Tanaka waited because she could see that Stone had more to say, but he also told me something else. Stone continued. He told me that humans are different from every other species in the galaxy because we remember. We hold on to our grudges and our dreams with equal determination. And we never stop working toward what we believe is right. He gestured at the fleet display, showing nearly 1,000 warships waiting in the darkness. Around Sol, this fleet is not about revenge. He said, it is about justice. It is about proving that someone will say no to tyrants, even when no one else will. Tanaka nodded because she understood exactly what he meant. The Concord had failed the galaxy by choosing comfort over principle, by allowing the strong to prey on the weak. Because confrontation was inconvenient, humanity would not make the same mistake. 3 weeks later, Ship 1000 rolled off the assembly lines of Titan Shipyard, a massive dreadnought that the workers had already named Reckoning. And Admiral Stone stood on its bridge as the final systems came online. He looked out at the fleet that humanity had built in secret. 1,000 warships crewed by men and women who had never known anything but preparation for this moment. And he felt the weight of 2 centuries of patience finally lifting. Signal all fleet commanders, he said to his communications officer. Tell them to begin final preparations for departure. The officer hesitated for just a moment before asking the question that everyone wanted. Answer, where are we going? Sir Stone smiled, and it was not a kind expression. We are going to attend a meeting, he said. I believe we have been absent for quite some time, and there are matters that require our attention. The fleet began moving toward the edge of Sol System. 1,000 ships of war, emerging from the darkness that had hidden them for so long. The galaxy had forgotten about humanity. It was time to remind them. High Chancellor Vorex of the Malurian Oligarchy was in the middle of his opening remarks for the 4,217th Annual Galactic Concord Assembly when every alarm in the system began screaming at once. The Grand Assembly Hall had never heard such chaos in all its millennia of existence, with representatives from 900 species scrambling for information while security forces tried to determine what was happening and failed. Completely, Vorex gripped his podium with all 4 arms and demanded answers from his military advisors. But they could only stare at their displays with expressions of pure disbelief. Ships. One of them finally managed to say, ships everywhere. They just appeared out of nowhere. How many ships? Vorex demanded. The advisors swallowed hard before answering. 1,000, High Chancellor. 1,000 warships in perfect formation around Volantis Prime. The chamber fell silent as that number sank in because 1,000 warships was more than most species could field in their entire history. More than the Concord Defense Fleet had ever assembled even in times of greatest crisis. Who are they? Vorex asked. Kreth. Some new power we have not encountered. The advisor shook his head slowly. The ships are broadcasting identification signals, he said. They claim to be human. Laughter erupted from several sections of the chamber because that was obviously impossible. Because humanity had collapsed 2 centuries ago. Because their worlds were empty and their colonies had been redistributed, and they were nothing but a cautionary tale about the fragility of young species. But the laughter died quickly when the holographic displays around the chamber activated to show the fleet that surrounded their world. The ships were enormous, far larger than anything the Concord had ever built, with sleek dark hulls that seemed to drink in light rather than reflected, and weapons arrays that covered every surface in configurations that no one recognized. They moved with perfect synchronization, like a single organism with 1,000 bodies. And as the representatives watched in growing horror, the ships began repositioning themselves into a formation that left no doubt about their capability. They were surrounding. Valantis primed the way a predator surrounds prey. The communication system crackled, with an incoming transmission and every screen in the grand assembly hall displayed the same image. A human male in a military uniform sitting in a command chair with absolute calm on his face. "This is Admiral Marcus Stone of the United Human Fleet," the man said in a voice that carried no anger and no fear. "We apologize for missing the last 200 meetings, but we had some renovations to complete." Vorix found his voice after several seconds of stunned silence. "This is outrageous," he said. "You cannot simply appear in Concord space with weapons armed and demand attention. There are protocols. There are procedures." Admiral Stone smiled, and it was not a reassuring expression. "We are aware of your protocols," he replied. "We have been watching and listening for 2 centuries while your protocols allowed the Kreth hegemony to devour species after species. We have seen your procedures fail every victim who ever asked this body for help." He leaned forward slightly in his chair. "Your protocols do not apply to us anymore, High Chancellor. We withdrew from the Concord 200 years ago, precisely because your protocols were worthless." The holographic display shifted to show a new figure materializing in the chamber itself. A young woman in formal diplomatic attire who walked calmly to the back row of the assembly where a single empty chair had gathered dust for 2 centuries. Maya-chan brushed the dust from the seat that her ancestors had once occupied and sat down with a composure that belied the 1,000 warships backing her words. "I am Ambassador Maya-chan," she said, "great-great-granddaughter of Ambassador Chen Wei, who once sat in this very chair. I have been authorized to speak for humanity in all matters pertaining to our return to galactic affairs." Vorix stared at her with his compound eyes wide in something that might have been fear or might have been rage. "You cannot simply return after 200 years of silence and expect to resume your seat," he said. "You abandoned this body. You forfeited your membership." Maya smiled, and it was a smile that had been practiced by generations of chums who had waited for this moment. "We did not abandon anything," she replied. "We retreated because this body refused to protect us when we needed protection. We went silent because we could not trust this body to respect our sovereignty. We built that fleet because this body taught us that the only voice worth hearing is the voice backed by force." She stood and addressed the entire assembly, with her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "We are not here to threaten you," she said. "We are here to address several outstanding agenda items that were tabled for future discussion 2 centuries ago and never revisited." The Kreth representative in the chamber was already trying to leave, his massive form pushing through crowds of smaller species as he made for the exit. But he stopped when Maya's next words reached him. "The first item on our agenda," she continued, "is the illegal occupation of human colonial worlds by the Kreth hegemony." She turned to look directly at the Kreth representative, and her eyes held no mercy. "Those worlds were never legally redistributed because we never legally ceased to exist. We simply stopped talking. And now we are talking again." The Kreth representative found his voice, a deep rumbling sound that had intimidated countless species over centuries of conquest. "You dare threaten the hegemony," he said. "You are one species with one fleet against an empire that has crushed dozens of civilizations." Maya nodded as if conceding the point. "You are correct that you have crushed many civilizations," she said, "but you have never faced a civilization that spent 200 years preparing specifically to fight you." She pulled up holographic display showing the current disposition of Kreth forces across their empire. "We know where every one of your ships is stationed," she continued. "We know the patrol routes and the defensive positions and the fleet yards. We know the names of your admirals and the specifications of your weapons. We have spent 2 centuries learning everything about you." The Kreth representative said nothing because there was nothing to say. Admiral Stone spoke again from the fleet command. "Humanity offers the following terms," he said. "The Kreth hegemony will withdraw from all illegally occupied territories within 30 standard days. This includes former human colonies and the homeworlds of the Selvani and the Orth and the Kethi murmurs tread through the assembly because the Selvani and Orth and Kethi were extinct species. Wiped out by Kreth expansion decades ago, they are not extinct." Maya said quietly, "We found them, survivors hiding in deep space. Refugees with nowhere to go because no one would help them. We sheltered them within our hidden territory, and we promised them that one day we would bring them home." She looked around the assembly at representatives who had watched those species die and done nothing. "Today, we keep that promise." The Kreth representative straightened to his full height, towering over the smaller species around him. "And if we refuse your terms," he demanded. Admiral Stone answered that question, "then we will remove you from those territories by force. And unlike this assembly, we do not issue empty threats." The 1,000 ships around Volantis Prime shifted their formation slightly, weapon systems powering up with a hum that could be felt through the very fabric of the station. "The hegemony has 30 days. Stone said, "Choose wisely." The transmission ended, and Maya Chun sat back down in her dusty chair, folding her hands in her lap as if she had all the time in the universe. The Grand Assembly had never been so quiet. In all its millennia of existence, for the first time in recorded history, the elder races understood what it felt like to be the ones who were powerless, and they did not enjoy the sensation at all. Warlord Desic of the Kreth hegemony received a human ultimatum with the contempt it deserved, crushing the data tablet in his massive clawed hand and letting the fragments fall to the floor of his throne room. His advisors watched in nervous silence as their supreme commander paced before the great windows of the hegemony flagship, his scales rippling with barely contained fury. "They dare," he rumbled. "These insects who hid in darkness for 2 centuries dare to threaten the greatest military power in the galaxy." One of his admirals cleared his throat carefully before speaking. "Supreme One, perhaps we should consider the intelligence reports. The human fleet appears to possess technologies we have not encountered before." Thesak turned on him with eyes blazing. "Technologies?" He spat. "They are primitives who could barely light a fire when we were conquering star systems. Whatever tricks they have learned in their isolation will crumble against the might of the hegemony." He activated the strategic display showing the full strength of Kreth military power. Thousands of warships spread across dozens of conquered systems. The accumulated might of a civilization that had never known defeat. "Assemble the primary battle fleet," he commanded. "We will meet these humans at the border of their precious colonies, and we will show them what happens to species that forget their place." Kreth Armada gathered at a system called Horizon's Edge. 1,200 warships bristling with weapons that had shattered countless enemies, crewed by warriors who had never tasted defeat. Thesak commanded from the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought conquest that had led to destruction of 3 civilizations and bore the scars of 100 battles. With pride, he watched his fleet arrange itself in the traditional Kreth battle formation, a wedge of overwhelming force designed to crush opposition through sheer power. And he felt the confidence that came from centuries of victory. The humans arrived exactly when they said they would. 500 ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, dark shapes against the starfield that seemed to appear from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Tex laughed when he saw their numbers. "They bring half a fleet against our full strength. Bring half a fleet against our full strength," he said to his admirals. They are even more foolish than I thought. He opened a communication channel to the human commander, Admiral Stone. He said with mock courtesy, "I see you have come to witness the destruction of your species. I will make it quick as a gesture of respect for your courage, if not your intelligence." Stone's face appeared on the view screen. Calm and unreadable warlord Desek, he replied, "I am required by human military law to offer you one final opportunity to withdraw. If you disengage now and return to hegemony space, your fleet will not be harmed." Kreth bridge crew erupted in laughter, and Desek joined them, his massive jaws spreading in what passed for a smile among his species. "You offer mercy to us," he said when he could speak again. "You bring 500 ships against 1,200, and you offer us mercy." Stone nodded slightly. "I do," he said, "because what is about to happen here does not need to happen. Because your warriors do not need to die for your pride." Thesek's amusement vanished, and his voice dropped to a deadly growl. "All ships," he commanded, "attack formation. Destroy them." All the Kreth armada surged forward with weapons charging. 1,200 ships of war descending on the human fleet like a wave of destruction that had never been stopped. The Battle of Horizon's Edge began at precisely 1400 hours Galactic Standard Time. It ended 11 minutes. Later, the human ships did not fight the way any species had ever fought. Before, they moved with impossible precision, each vessel knowing exactly where every other vessel was and where every enemy ship would be. Moments before it arrived there, their weapons fired not at where the Kreth ships were, but at where they were going to be. Quantum-locked targeting systems predicting enemy movements with accuracy that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The first volley of human kinetic accelerators tore through Kreth shields like they were made of paper, punching holes in warships that had never been breached by any enemy. Cascade torpedoes followed, small projectiles that seemed harmless until they struck their targets and turned stable reactor cores into expanding balls of nuclear. Ship after ship exploded in chains of destruction that lit the darkness of space with the deaths of Kreth warriors who had never imagined they could lose. Thesek watched in growing horror as his invincible armada crumbled. Before his eyes, reform the line, he screamed at his admirals. Concentrate fire on their lead ships, but the human fleet was everywhere and nowhere. Ships flickering in and out of sensor range as they repositioned faster than Kreth targeting systems could track the flagship. Conquest shuddered as the first human weapons found her, shields failing under impacts that no Kreth engineer had ever anticipated. "We cannot win this," one of his admirals said with terror in his voice. "We must retreat." Thesek turned on him with fury. "The hegemony does not retreat," he roared. "Then the hegemony dies here," the admiral replied. "Look at what remains of our fleet." Asuk looked, and what he saw broke something inside him that had never been touched before. Of his 1,200 warships, fewer than 200 remained, scattered and burning and desperately trying to escape the methodical destruction being visited upon them by an unseen enemy that would not miss. He had never known defeat, and now he was watching his entire fleet die around him. "Signal retreat," he finally said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "All ships fall back to hegemony space." The surviving Kreth vessels fled, their mighty engines pushing them away from the killing field as fast as they could travel. And the human fleet let them go. Admiral Stone opened a communication channel that was broadcast across the entire galaxy. Every species watching as the greatest military power in known space ran from an enemy they had dismissed as primitives. "This battle is over," Stone said calmly. "The Kreth hegemony has 20 standard days to withdraw from all illegally occupied territories as previously stated. Any Kreth military vessel found in those territories after that deadline will be destroyed without warning." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "This was not about revenge," he continued. This was about proving that tyranny has consequences. That someone will stand up and say no even when everyone else looks away. He stood from his command chair and addressed the watching galaxy we did not come back to conquer. He said, "We came back because someone had to, because the Concorde failed every species that ever asked for protection, because the strong have preyed on the weak for too long while ancient powers debated procedure." The image shifted to show the wreckage of the Kreth fleet. Hundreds of destroyed warships drifting in the void. "This is what happens when no one else will act," he said quietly. "We take no pleasure in this destruction, but we will not apologize for it either." The hegemony was warned, and they chose violence. He sat back down, and his voice hardened. "The deadline stands, 20 days. Do not make us come back." The transmission ended, and the galaxy sat in stunned silence as they processed what they had just witnessed. The Kreth hegemony, undefeated for 1,000 years, had been broken in 11 minutes by a species everyone had written off as extinct and somewhere in the depths of space. Survivors of 3 supposedly dead civilizations watched the broadcast and wept with joy because the humans had kept their promise. They were going home. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Horizon's Edge, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Kreth hegemony had shattered like glass, struck by a hammer. Its conquered peoples rising up against their weakened masters, while human ships patrolled the borders to ensure the revolution succeeded. 3 species that the galaxy had mourned as extinct now walked their homeworlds again. The Sylvani and the Orth and the Kethi returning to planets they had been driven from decades ago with human engineers, helping them rebuild what had been destroyed. The galactic Concorde faced a crisis of identity that threatened to tear it apart, because the question on everyone's mind was simple and devastating. What were they for if not to prevent exactly what had happened under their watch? For centuries, High Chancellor Vorax had aged visibly. In the months since humanity's return, his once proud bearing now stooped with the weight of questions he could not answer. And he stood at his podium in the Grand Assembly Hall, knowing that this session would define the future of galactic civilization. The chamber was fuller than it had ever been. Representatives from species who had never bothered attending, now desperate to understand what came next. And at the center of attention was a single human woman sitting in a chair that no longer gathered dust. Maya Chun wore the formal robes of a senior ambassador, a rank that humanity had never held before, and she waited patiently for the High Chancellor to call the assembly to order. Honored representatives, Vorax began, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a leader who had watched everything he believed in crumble. We are gathered to address the formal petition submitted by the United Human Government regarding their status within the Galactic Concorde. He paused, and his forearms hung limply at his sides. Before we proceed, I wish to say something that I should have said 200 years ago. The chamber fell silent because High Chancellors did not make personal statements, and everyone sensed that something unprecedented was about to happen. We failed. Vorax said simply, "This body, this institution that was created to protect the weak and preserve peace. We failed every species that asked us for help and received only empty words." He looked directly at Maya. "We failed humanity when they needed us most. We dismissed them and patronized them and abandoned them to enemies we were too comfortable to confront. And when they withdrew from our company, we told ourselves it was their failure rather than ours." Maya said nothing, but her expression softened slightly. "I cannot undo the centuries of harm that occurred under our watch." Vorax continued, "I cannot bring back the billions who died while we debated procedure. But I can acknowledge that we were wrong and that we must change." He straightened his posture with visible effort. "The petition before this body asked that humanity be granted senior membership in a reformed galactic Concorde. with full voting rights and a permanent seat on the full Ace. Security Council murmurs spread through the chamber because senior membership had only ever been granted to species with histories measured in tens of thousands of years. Species who had earned their place through ages of diplomatic service. Some will argue that humanity has not earned this status. Vorik said that 300 years of galactic presence is insufficient, regardless of recent events. He looked around the chamber at representatives who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, but I would ask those critics to consider what humanity has demonstrated in their time among us. Not military strength, although they have shown that in abundance, but something more important. He turned back to Maya. They showed us that power without principle is meaningless, that the ability to act is worthless if you lack the courage to use it. They did what we should have done, and they did it not for conquest, but for justice. Maya rose from her seat and walked to the speaking platform, her footsteps echoing in a chamber that had never been so attentive to human words. She looked out at the assembled representatives, at species that had dismissed her ancestors and ignored their pleas and left them to face enemies alone. And she felt the weight of 2 centuries of patience finally reaching its conclusion. High Chancellor, she began, honored representatives. I speak today not as a conqueror, but as a neighbor who hopes to become a partner. She pulled up a holographic display showing the disposition of human forces across the galaxy. We have 1,000 warships, she said. Enough firepower to challenge any power in known space. Enough strength to impose our will on any species or coalition that opposes us. The chamber tensed because they had seen what those ships could do, but we built that fleet for protection. She continued, not for domination. We built it because we learned the hardest lesson the galaxy could teach. That nice words mean nothing without the power to back them up. She dismissed the fleet display and replaced it with images of the Sylvani and Urth and Kethi returning to their homeworlds. Children playing in streets that had been empty for decades. We used that power to save 3 species from extinction. She said quietly, we used it to break a tyranny that had operated unopposed for 1,000 years. And now we face a choice about how we will use it going forward. She looked directly at the Kreth representative who sat alone and diminished in a chamber that no longer feared his people. We could become what the hegemony was, she said. We could use our strength to take whatever we want and crush anyone who objects. The galaxy would bow to us because they would have no choice. The chamber held its breath, but that is not who we are. Maya said firmly, that is not why we built. Those ships are why we returned to this assembly after 2 centuries of silence. She spread her arms to encompass the entire chamber. We are here because we believe in what the Concord was supposed to be. A gathering of civilizations committed to protecting each other and resolving disputes without violence. A community where the weak do not live in fear of the strong. Her voice hardened slightly. We are also here to ensure that the Concord becomes what it was supposed to be, rather than what it became. We will not accept empty procedures and endless delays while tyrants devour the innocent. If this body cannot find the courage to act, then we will act alone. But we would rather act together. She stepped back from the speaking platform. Humanity requests senior membership not as a reward for our military victories, but as recognition of our commitment to making this body work. We want to help reform the Concord into something worthy of the ideals it claims to represent. High Chancellor Vorik nodded slowly. The petition is before the Assembly, he said. All in favor of granting humanity senior membership in the reformed Galactic Concord. The vote was unanimous, not because the elder races feared human weapons, although many of them did, but because they finally understood what they had lost when they let humanity walk away 2 centuries ago. They had lost the one species that still believed in principles worth fighting. for Maya Chen took her new seat in the front row of the Grand Assembly, looking out at a galaxy that had finally chosen to listen. And she allowed herself to imagine what her great-great-grandfather would have thought. If he could see this moment, he would have been proud. She decided, proud that his family had never stopped believing that things could be better in a quiet garden on Earth. A memorial wall bore the names of those who had worked and waited and died during the long silence. And at the top of that wall were carved words that Chen Wei had spoken in his final days. They will remember us. The inscription read, "They will remember that we tried. Maya had made sure that the galaxy would never forget." And in the decades that followed, as the reformed Concord grew into something that actually protected the weak and stood against tyranny, as human ships patrolled the borders not as conquerors, but as guardians, as species that had never known safety learned what it meant to live without fear in all those years, the elder races learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach, that sometimes the youngest voice in the room is the one worth hearing. And sometimes the empty chair is filled by someone who changes everything. The stars had always been waiting. Humanity had simply needed time to become worthy of claiming them, and now they finally had.